Hello Game Boys and Game Girls, I'm the Game Boy Guru and welcome to episode 4 of Cleaning Carts. Before we get started with the topic today, I wanted to briefly go over something here. This is dexterity that I cleaned in a previous episode, and as I was doing that and putting it back together, I noticed that the little plastic tab piece that sticks out from the bottom portion of the shell popped out. And this has happened to me a few times before as I've gone through and done some cart cleaning. And anyway, typically when that happens, I re-glue them. And I do that with just basically some super glue or crazy glue or what have you. I've got some generic super glue here, and as you can see, if you look in here, you don't see that little tab in there, and that's this little plastic piece here. You'll be able to see it or not. That guy right there. So typically speaking, I just put a tiny dab of super glue on the underside of the tab, or usually on the actual inside of the case here, just enough so that you can reattach that piece. And you don't need very much, and you don't want to use very much, because when it dries, if you use too much, it'll be thick and layered and kind of get in the way. You might have to look at sanding that down. But realistically, what you want to do is just put that little bit of glue on there and then reattach it as closely as you can to how it was set up before. So that it's back in place, and that way once it dries and you put your actual card back in, you can line it up so that that hole there on the top goes right into right over that plastic piece. So I just wanted to show that off real quick, and now you'll be able to see I've got the piece on there. And that'll probably take a good 10-15 minutes to set. So hopefully by the time I'm done with this video, or done with the rest of the cleaning there, I'll be able to put this cart back together and be done. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get to actual cart cleaning. First up, we have Olympic Summer Games. And the topic that I wanted to start with today is, why do you collect? Why do any of us collect? There are a number of reasons why we might want to collect video games, and I'll cover a few of mine here. And of course, I'd love to hear from all of you as to the reasons why you collect, so we can discuss further in the comments. But reasons why I collect. First of all, it comes down to just a love of the hobby. I love video games, and I enjoy collecting in and of itself. It's not the only thing I enjoy about video games. Obviously, I enjoy playing them and discussing them and learning about them. And as someone who's in information technology, I love looking at the technology itself and kind of learning the hardware and what it is and what it's capable of, and seeing companies push the hardware and all sorts of things like that. But it starts with a general love of the hobby. In terms of additional reasons, there's a certain thrill to the hunt, so to speak. I really enjoy going out and looking for games and finding bargains or finding good deals on things. In this day and age, you don't get that as much as you did, say, 10 or 12 years ago, but good deals can still be had. I've shown those off on my pickups videos and things like that, and so that stuff still exists, and it's still fun to go out and find those things. Discover that somewhat rare game on the rack at Goodwill, or see a game store with a really good game for a reasonable price, something that you might actually want to pay the money for. And so that's that's another aspect that I really enjoy, and something that I get a lot of a kick out of. But yeah, I really enjoy the hunt and being able to go out and find these games. There's always a desire to continue to find and discover new games, or new to me games. As much as I've scoured the internet and looked at various things and read magazines over the years and tried to be as informed as I can about my hobby, I'm always learning new things and discovering games I'd never heard of. Obscure Japanese games, or U.S. games that failed to make a splash. This is College Slam, by the way. Speaking of games that probably didn't make much of a splash. But it's always fun to me to find games that are, that I would consider obscure, or that might be fun and appealing that I'd never heard of. It's also fun to find stuff that I've read about, or I've seen video clips of, or that kind of a thing, but have never actually played. And to be able to take a copy home with me. I just enjoy that. Another reason would be to kind of fulfill some childhood dreams. And I know that sounds a little bit, I don't know, trite or what have you, but it's true. I've mentioned before, I used to sit at my grandparents' house, and they would get, for those of you old enough to remember, they would get the Sears catalog and the JCPenney catalog and some of these other things. They would get those catalogs in the mail. And my younger brother and I would sit down or lay out on the floor at their house while we were over visiting with my grandparents, and we would just go through those catalogs page by page, through the toy section and the video game section, and just absolutely sit in wonder looking at all this stuff, all these different games and all these different systems, especially for things like the Atari Lynx or the Game Gear, which were, for me, unattainable. A Game Gear was something that I thought about but didn't really have a chance to play with, outside of one friend that let me play his briefly, and or the Lynx, which no one in my area sold the Lynx, so there was no way that I was ever going to be able to buy one when I was a kid. So that was a big deal for me, and I just always enjoyed looking through those catalogs and thinking, someday I'm going to be able to afford to buy all of this stuff, and I'm going to be able to play all of these fun games. And so there's a bit of childlike wonder with that. And even as an adult, with all the cynicism of adulthood and everything that you go through, I try not to lose that sense of childlike wonder as much as possible. And video gaming is one way that I can kind of keep connected to that. Now, granted, that carries over into adulthood as well, with more mature games and things like that. I certainly would not have been able to play something like God of War as a kid, or probably even Call of Duty. But I can still get that with new games and get that childlike sense of wonder with something. I think I've mentioned before the Wonderful 101 on the Wii U. When I played through that here a few years ago, that's my favorite Wii U game, and that game gave me that sense of childlike wonder as I was playing through it, because it was just so charming and also difficult, like games were when I was a kid. So that's a big reason. And then, of course, an obvious reason is choice. I want to be able to walk into this game room here and pick off any game off the shelf that I want to play. I've got certain goals in terms of gaming, certain games I'm going to play. I'm always going to be working on a shmup for the Shmup Club, and RF Generation group, community group, is always going to have one game or another that they're going to play through, and sometimes I'll participate in those. But I'm kind of trying to get myself to a point where I'm always going to be working on 2 or 3 games at a time. And with that, I want to have plenty of choice. I don't want to be one of those people that only plays the newest games because that's what everybody's playing and what everybody's talking about. I don't concern myself that much with what everyone's playing and what everyone's talking about. I just want to play games that appeal to me and look fun, and discover games that I've never played before or don't know much about. I forgot to mention that was Pack in Time that I just put back together there, and now here's RoboCop. So for me, it boils down to choice as well, because I want to be able to, choose. I want to be able to walk into the room, like I said, and just pick any game off the shelf and go play it at random because I want to try it out. In terms of collection and motivation, what motivates you to keep collecting despite challenges that you might face in the hobby? There are a number of things that you can run up against when you're collecting. Maybe you live in a rural area, or an area where, either a rural area where there are no sources for games outside of eBay and Amazon and online outlets, or the occasional post on a local or regional community Facebook group where somebody might have 2 or 3 really common games or whatever up to sell for more money than they're worth, kind of a thing. Those kinds of situations. Or in the opposite spectrum, you live in an area with a lot of collectors, where going to the pawn shops and the thrift stores and the game stores and that, where those resources get picked over way too fast, or are always devoid of anything good or anything that you really want to play. And so, there's different schools of thought on that. For me, I've come to realize that even though I can't buy as many good games now from pawn shops and thrift stores as I did just 2 years ago, I'm still finding that there are still good deals to be had as long as you're patient. You have to be patient. You have to understand that not every time you go to the Goodwill, not every time you go to the pawn shop, not every time you go to the game store, are you going to score a good deal or find something that you want. Sometimes you just have to be patient. Sometimes you just have to understand that for whatever reason, that this trip that you're taking now, where you're not finding anything, is going to be your one trip out of 4 or 5 where you're going to come up completely empty-handed. And maybe 2 or 3 of those additional trips you'll only find 1 or maybe 2 things, and then say 1 out of those you'll actually get a handful of things that are worth your time, or stuff that you're looking for. Even if stuff is still expensive, it doesn't mean that you can't still buy stuff. It just means that you have to slow down and save up your money a little bit more. Or again, be patient. Wait for good deals. Cultivate relationships with other local collectors and game stores, pawn shop owners, and get to know your Goodwill clerks and let them know that you're looking for stuff. And you might find that they will reach out to you or cut you good deals when you go to those places so that they can continue to retain you as a customer. I found that is something that a lot of places will do. And you just have to put yourself out there. There are still good people in the hobby. That kind of segues nicely. There are game store clerks or owners. There are people on Facebook groups or on Twitter or other places that are gonna be good to you. They're not going to treat you poorly. They're going to treat you fairly. They're not going to price gouge you. They're going to do right by you and not overprice stuff arbitrarily just to make a couple of extra bucks on something that either they've had on their shelf forever and haven't used, or came about for next to nothing, and then trying to resell to you for a huge profit. I scored a good deal on a couple of TurboGrafx games here this past week, and got those in the mail today, and I'll be showing them off in my next pickups video here at the end of the month. And so those kinds of situations still exist. You just have to, again, I'm going to repeat myself, but you just have to be patient, understand that there are people who aren't interested in merely profiting from you, or they're interested in profiting from you. So because of that, they cut you a good deal, because then that means you'll be back and they'll make more money from you in the long run. And it becomes a win-win situation, because you're spending more money with them and they're selling you more products, so they're making more money in the aggregate anyway. That was Space Invaders, by the way. One of those really good games on the Game Boy. And this is Hyper Load Runner, once owned by someone with the initials DM. So, I think it works out. I mean, you can be impatient and you can buy from eBay, or you can pay market price for whatever and get what you want now. Uh-oh, I dropped a screw. And you can really go hog wild and spend a lot of money on games and accessories and consoles and that. And that's fine. If you've got the cash to do that, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking for good deals or what have you, you need to cultivate relationships and be patient and, set limits for yourself as to what you're willing to spend, all of that. Final question here I want to look at is, what would make you stop collecting, or at least stop acquiring new stuff? For me, there are only a small handful of reasons I could think of. The first and foremost would be if I was ever in a financial situation that was so dire where I was basically destitute and I wasn't bringing in any money or couldn't earn any money or something like that, and it got to the point where I had to sell my games in order to eat. I don't see that happening, because I have a good resume and I've got marketable skills, and even in the interim, I can work other jobs, and I've done that in the past. If I've had a bit of a break between jobs, but that would be an obvious situation that would stop Another reason I think that I might stop collecting is if I ever had something that was a major kind of medical situation or an accident or whatever that either put me into a bad financial position again to where I had to use all my money to pay those bills and those medical bills, and I wouldn't be able to afford to buy new stuff. You know, that would be probably a situation where I would keep what I have, but wouldn't buy new stuff because I would be focusing on paying off the medical bills and whatever else that I needed in order to make that happen. The one situation that might make me actually stop collecting and sell off altogether would be if I was ever in a bad accident and I became disabled to the point where I could no longer play video games. At that point, I would probably stop collecting, and I would probably sell off most, if not all, of my stuff, because I wouldn't want this stuff hanging around, staring me in the face, taunting me, and, that little voice that you hear, play me, without having the physical ability to do so, even through something like Microsoft's innovative new controller that they've designed and developed. If I was ever at a point where I was totally disabled or disabled enough to where I could no longer engage in the hobby other than keeping up with it, that would be a reason for me to stop collecting and actually get rid of my stuff, because I wouldn't be able to use it. And so it would be better for me to pass it on to others who can actually make use of it and get enjoyment from it, rather than just sit on my shelves. This is NBA Jam Tournament Edition, last game for today. The other scenario that I don't see happening but is possible is that I might lose interest in the hobby. As we get older, our tastes and our desires and our lives change, and sometimes we like the same things that we have always liked, and sometimes that changes, and those things become relatively unimportant. It doesn't happen for everybody, but I've heard of people that were really into gaming when they were early adults, and by the time they had kids and had a couple of life, big life situations happen or what have you, they just lost interest in the hobby, or they refocused their lives on their families or whatever else they've needed to do in order to get by, and as a result have just got out of the hobby organically. And there's nothing wrong with that. It happens to lots of people. I don't see that happening to me. I'm invested enough in the hobby that I don't see myself losing interest or my desire to collect and play waning. It goes through periods of downtime, so to speak, where you don't play as much or you don't collect as much. I went through a few years where I wasn't playing that much in terms of video games, strictly because I was busy with work and I didn't have a lot of time. There were times when life stuff got in the way, and I had to focus on other things. But ultimately, this is one of my primary hobbies. My biggest hobbies are video games and music, listening to music and appreciating that, and then technology. I'm in information technology for my job, but I still also have peripheral interest in technology, computers, and science in general, and so that kind of all falls in together. And so all of those things kind of intertwine in a way. So I don't see myself falling out of video gaming completely ever. Will there be a time when I'm not going to be able to play some of these games anymore? Yeah, absolutely. There's going to be a time when I'm not physically able to do much in terms of shoot 'em ups because I'm just not going to have the reflexes. Outside of just sort of casually playing some of the games that don't require as much from you physically, or just playing what little bit I can for the brief enjoyment of it. One of the things I'm looking at is when I reach that point, or when I reach that age, I'll probably transition to playing things like role-playing games, games that are a little bit more slow-paced and don't require the reflexes and the same level of physical prowess, I guess I would say. That's what I see myself doing at that point when I'm no longer physically able to play certain games. I'll just transition and play something else, something that doesn't require the same level of dedication or the same level of hand-eye coordination. Well, that's all I wanted to discuss today, and that's all the cards I have to clean. What do you guys think? Why do you collect? What motivates you to keep collecting despite challenges that you face with the hobby? And are there any reasons or life events that you think could make you stop collecting? And what might those be? Let's discuss in the comments below. If you like this video, consider giving it a thumbs up and let me know you want to see more content like this. And also consider subscribing so that you can see more of my videos in your YouTube feed. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at GameBoyGuru. I'll have the link in the description below to my blog where you can read all my Game Boy reviews. That is GameBoyGuru.blogspot.com. Also, make sure you check out Nira and his channel. He provided the Super Mario Land Overworld music that I use as the intro for my videos, and he's got a bunch of other great chiptune and game music covers as well, so make sure you go check those out. As always, thanks for watching, thanks for playing, and game on.